Brandon Rink. You can find his work at OrangeandWhite.com. I'm Marty Coleman, a Tim Beret wannabe. Brandon, today we're going to walk through the first 6 games of the Clemson schedule, starting off with the Georgia Bulldogs. Clemson pulled out a 38-35 victory last year in Clemson. This year, they returned the favor by going between the hedges. Georgia has 5 returning starters on offense, 8 on defense, and both kickers. Other notable returnees in my mind are, of course, Todd Gurley, wide receivers Chris Conley and Michael Bennett, who had 45 and 41 receptions, respectively. And Keith Marshall, who, interestingly enough, I did a little research. I've been looking at the defense this week, and I know it's a surprise to everybody who reads my site. It's mostly offense-focused, but Keith Marshall had 16 carries for 43 yards against Clemson last year, 4 0-yard rushes, and 11 of those 16 rushes were 3 yards or less. They stopped him. They did not stop Todd Gurley. I think he's still running. And they didn't stop Aaron Murray, who I noted on Twitter earlier in the week was 20 of 29, but 8 of those 20 completions were explosive plays, meaning 16 yards or more. What's your outlook on this game in the opener of 2014?
Just starting on offense, Gurley had a season-best total against Clemson just on 12 carries, 154 yards, and he's averaged 6.1 yards per carry over his career. So he's going to be tough. Keith Marshall, he has had some knee injury issues, and it wasn't exactly clear if he was going to play this year. They were talking about maybe redshirting him in the spring, but it looks like he's got the full go, which just gives Georgia another element to their offense. And then, the big change is Hudson Mason taking over at quarterback. Aaron Murray has basically every SEC record you can think of, passing-wise, and, of course, at Georgia, too. And Mason, he got sort of an early tryout last year. Murray went down to injury, and Mason averaged 8.8 yards per attempt, which is pretty good. And he's got Malcolm Mitchell back, who was injured in the Clemson game last year. He's got Bennett and Conley. His issue is replacing, over 100 starts up front. And the good thing is that, for him is Georgia, recruits, in that elite level where they're just restocking up front.
Yeah, it wasn't all Todd Gurley, as I mentioned just a moment ago. When you think back to that game, I just remember, of course, Todd Gurley running down the sideline for 75 yards, Todd Gurley running over folks. But when I went back and looked at the play-by-play, a lot of it was Aaron Murray to various receivers. So which gives me a little bit of pause knowing the depth we talked about, or lack thereof, of the Clemson defensive backfield that we spoke about on previous podcasts. Georgia does have a new defensive coordinator. Clemson fans should be familiar with him, Jeremy Pruitt, who was at Florida State last year for the national championship run. What do you know about the Dogs' defense?
Well, at Florida State, they ran sort of a 4-3 multiple. It seems like they're going to move more to 3-4, which makes a little more sense with Jeremy Pruitt coming from Alabama, working under Saban. They're going to have a lot of key returners in that sort of front seven, defensive line, linebacker. But, they're replacing 3 starters that all transferred out from the secondary. And, it seems like, they're losing a guy pretty much every day. You look at it's just, it's ridiculous what's going on there. But, they have talent. And Pruitt is going to, work with that talent. And they've worked on this off season. What's interesting to me is, how much they put into conditioning. There was the, famous YouTube clips of the guys just sort of flailing and, getting, sort of fake injuries or being accused on Twitter. So, they've worked this off season and sort of personalized, personal training plans to get everyone where Pruitt wants them. So that's an interesting aspect going into this game because they might be facing some depth issues.
All right. Well, we're going to do a little feature here we call the early pick. And by the way, you are allowed to change, like I did last year. I think I changed about 9 times before the game actually was played. We're going to make an early pick here. Georgia was an early 9-point favorite in the early spread. And we're just talking straight up. And I hate to say it, but I'll start off the season. I'll take Georgia to win this one. Who do you see taking them the opening game of the season?
Yeah, I think 9 points is way too much. I think the Georgia defense is going to be better maybe than what you would think just looking at the headlines this offseason. I think Mason's going to be a really solid quarterback. He's got plenty of weapons. He'll be, that his issue is going to be facing that Clemson defensive line with, a whole new front, or at least 3 new offensive line starters. Are they going to be able to keep him off Mason? Are they going to be able to run the ball? You figure they're going to with Gurley and Marshall and all the guys they can throw at them. So I've got Georgia just in a close one, 34-33, I said, or last month sometime.
Yeah, I think may end up being a field goal game, which, of course, it was last year, and I think we both predicted a field goal game. And as we talked about in our position preview, the Tigers being A, on the road, and B, without Chandler Catanzaro, may, if it's a close game, may end up in Georgia's favor. In week 2, the Tigers take on the South Carolina State Bulldogs. We won't spend a lot of time on South Carolina State. They were 9-4 last year and tied for first in the MEAC. And by the way, folks out there, I'm getting all of this information from Brandon's previews, schedule preview on OrangeandWhite.com, so check it out. Top 25 defense 9 of the last 10 seasons, and led the FCS in total defense last year. Obviously, Clemson has more talent and depth than South Carolina State. Not a lot else to say. I'm taking the Tigers in this one. What do you see in this game?
Yeah, I mean, it's, Clemson's, if anything, Clemson's taking care of business in these types of games, even, more of your cupcake FBS games. And South Carolina State's been a top 25 defense 9 of the last 10 seasons at the FCS level. And even, last year's game, it's a bit deceiving because Clemson had 2 pick sixes in that first half. Tyler Boyd actually had his second worst completion percentage and his second worst yard output of the year against SC State because, of course, they pulled them, with the lead in the first half. So a team that did sneak up on you if you were a lesser FBS team, but Clemson's not going to have any issue with them.
Yeah, this was if I remember correctly, this was the Cole Stout 19 of 21 game, I believe, last year. So he got plenty of action. And hopefully his action will be limited in this game this year, and we'll see some Deshaun Watson. Game 3, the one everybody's looking forward to, and I imagine the game out of the first 6 that we'll be spending a good bit of time on here, Florida State Seminoles in Tallahassee. The early line has Florida State by 17, and just for grins, the odds of winning a game if you end up being a 17-point underdog is 30.7%, not covering just winning the game outright. Obviously, Florida State was 14-0 last year, 8-0 in the ACC. They ran roughshod over all of the ACC, including Clemson and Death Valley. They returned 7 starters on offense, 6 on defense, both kickers. As you noted in your preview, they are strong up front, 2 first-team All-ACC linemen, and 114 career starts returning. What will be different about the Florida State offense this year, if anything?
I mean, you look at the numbers last year, and it was just pure dominance. I mean, you look at some of the advanced stats, that you'll see on, like, SB Nation and, Football Outsiders and all that. And, they were scoring, 5.5 points for every trip inside the 40. I mean, they're scoring nearly a touchdown every time they're getting into the opposing's half of the field. they've got the experience on the offensive line. They've got Jameis Winston, who's the real deal. He's was far and away the nation's leader in quarterback rating last year, 185. Was only one of 3 quarterbacks to average over 10 yards per pass attempt. And you really turned it on when it came against the top teams you faced. You averaged 333 passing yards and 10 touchdowns against Clemson, Miami, Florida, and Auburn. So they're where they're replacing on that offense is at running back. They've got Carlos Williams stepping up. He had 10 touchdowns in a reserve role last year, a ridiculous yards per carry attempt or average. So he's a guy that they're going to count on more this year. And then some of the recruiting hauls they've had the last couple of years, a guy like Dalvin Cook, former Clemson commit, we'll see more of him this year. And they got a few guys coming out, and it's just so many weapons, strong offensive line, plenty of targets to throw to. They're going to be tough.
On the defensive side, you noted that they're replacing their top 3 tacklers, including Telvin Smith and cornerback LaMarcus Joyner, who I think was kind of a key cog in that defense last year, kind of a honey badger type player that could turn the game around. Certainly did his part against Clemson last year. Of course, they have a new defensive coordinator who I don't know a lot about. Maybe you can tell the listeners about that defensive coordinator and what we can expect from this Seminole defense this year.
This is going to be sort of a continuation of what they've had the last few years. They're just sort of, you lose a 5-star, you replace them with a 5-star. You got guys like Mario Williams, who's had some decent numbers up to this point, but you figure this is a year where he's a junior. He's probably going to have that breakout season at defensive end. You have Jalen Ramsey, a 5-star safety, probably should have had a little more recognition among the ACC voters this last week of the ACC kickoff. And, they're going to run the same, sort of multiple, in-your-face defense that they have. But, losing on Marcus Joyner is a big deal. Joyner was a guy that moved around. He was playing corner. He played safety. He was sort of a nickel guy that was always blitzing, lots of tackles for loss. So he was a playmaker. They're going to have Ramsey or whoever to step up into that spot.
Okay, 17-point underdogs, late July, early August. I've got to go with Florida State here. I doubt they're going to win by 17 points. I say that even though we know what happened at Clemson last year, but I believe that was just a game that got away from the Tigers. I don't expect that to happen, but I'd have to favor Florida State, and the Tigers drop to 1-2 in my mind. How about you?
Yeah, despite all the playmakers that Clemson's losing on offense, I think the game will be a lot more like the 2012 matchup where it was more back and forth going into the start of the fourth quarter, and then FSU started to pull away. They had been hitting Clemson so hard that whole game, and then when they had a couple of punt kick returns just that knifed through Clemson's heart late in that third quarter, that's when they pulled away. And I see it being more like that, more of a 10-point, 14-point Florida State win.
Yeah, the last, correct me if I'm wrong, but the last 2 times, that game and the one the year before, I believe Clemson lost by 3 on a 55-yard field goal at the gun. And in the game you were just speaking about, it ended up being 49-37, but Clemson led into the third quarter, I believe.
Yeah, it was a one-score game. I think it's been a one-score game down there the last 3 or 4 games in Tallahassee, going back to when Clemson won down there in 2006.
Wow, interesting note. Okay, too bad last year's wasn't a one-score game. Hey, moving on to game number 4, North Carolina Tar Heels. This is one of the teams, I won't say they're overrated. I just, they remind me of the early years of the Dabo Swinney regime. You can't quite believe in them yet. They have some talent, but they just can't seem to get over that hump. The Tar Heels were 7-6 last year, 4-4 in the ACC. They have 8 returning offensive starters, 7 on defense, and both kickers, which seems to be a theme here, except for Clemson. And another theme is a 4-2-5 defensive scheme, which we'll hear about a lot. Tell me about the Tar Heel offense.
Well, under Marquise Williams, he's a rising sophomore. He was sort of the back end of the charge where they won 6 of 7 down the stretch to make a bowl and win the bowl game. He's kind of a dual threat. He had 536 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns that way, had about 1,700 passing yards, averaged 7.8 yards per pass, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So he's a guy that can hurt you a couple of different ways. He's got a selection of skill position guys. I mean, Quinshaw Davis is one of the best receivers in the ACC. And then you've got TJ Thorpe, a guy that's really valuable on special teams, one of the top kick return guys. And he's got a couple of running backs back. They're replacing their all-ACC left tackle and James Hurst, but they've recruited pretty well up there. It's going to be a matter of Fedora has they had that sort of strong debut where they were a top 15 offense under Fedora in 2011, I believe, or 2012, and then they've kind of dropped off since. So are they going to be that kind of Chad Morris no-head offense level, or are they going to be kind of in the middle? And that's going to really determine if they win that wide-open Coastal or not.
On the defensive side, as I mentioned, they're moving to a 4-2-5 scheme, or were they already in a 4-2-5 scheme? But they are looking for playmakers. At least that's what your preview says. What can you tell me about the North Carolina defense?
Well, they're under sort of a co-defense coordinator system with a couple of former Clemson coaches, Vic Koenig and Ron West. They're working to sort of reverse the trend that they've been going the last few years. When they were kind of under NCAA investigation, they had their guys like Marvin Austin and Robert Quinn and guys that they had a top 10 defense in 2009, and they've regressed each season. They were in the top 70 last year. So some of that's a product of having to even out, having a no-huddle offense on the other side. That's something that Clemson Venables and Kevin Steele have had to deal with over the years. But you figure they're going to be better. It's just a matter of how much better they're going to be. Clemson
is an early 4-point favorite at home versus the Tar Heel, which equates to a 57.3 winning percentage over the last 3 years. I think the Tigers are should be more than a 4-point favorite here, especially playing at home. See more in the 6-7 range. It'll be a close game for most of the game, but I see the Tigers winning this one to move to 2-2 and 1-1 in the ACC.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe they even tack on another score in the fourth quarter. I had them up 2 touchdowns. I think UNC is still going to be kind of finding themselves, especially on defense that time of year. And, they've got, one of the things that you don't really think of much because it's just really hard to quantify is UNC is really solid on special teams. That's going to be a game where Clemson has to contain the return game, which they've done pretty well at the last few years, and just not letting them have that momentum play where they have one of the best punt returners in the country in Ryan Switzer, and then they have one of the best kick returners in the country in TJ Thorpe.
Well, so Bradley Pinion may play a big part in this game. That's one thing that was underlooked last year in the Georgia game. If I recall correctly, there were no kickoff returns for Georgia whatsoever in that game. Pinion kicked all of them, all of the kickoffs for touchbacks, and there were quite a few, obviously, with 38 points for the Tigers. Moving on to game number 5, the NC State Wolfpack. Unbelievably, they went through the ACC without a win last year. Ended up the season at 3-9. They returned 7 on offense, 8 on defense, and both kickers. Again, that's a theme going through here. They've got a transfer quarterback coming in, I believe, from Florida, Jacoby Brissett, 6'4", 236. But I'm not sure what else they have on offense. What do you know about the Wolfpack?
sort of the definition of what coaches call year zero. It's sort of a year you just don't even want on the record books. So much transition, just such a big overhaul from Tom O'Brien and sort of the pass-happy scheme that they had with Mike Glennon and some of the guys, and moving to sort of run-based, no huddle, a MAC offense and under Dave Doran, and just they didn't have the right quarterback for the system. They brought in a transfer from Arkansas, and he got hurt, like I think even before the first game or in the first game, and it was, even Doran said last spring that it was kind of a season without Jacoby before the season even started. So he knew right then and there who his quarterback was, and it was just sort of a placeholder season. And Brissett, last played in 2012 at Florida, 66 completion percentage. Not that much action, just because you had Driscoll there. You had, I believe they had Tyler Murphy there too. He's at Boston College, and they have in terms of weapons, they have Shadrack Thornton, running back. He's led in rushing the last 2 seasons, almost 1,500 yards. They're replacing a lot in terms of receiver. It's really to be determined just how effective Brissett's going to be, just because we don't know what he has around him.
This is another team that's moving to the 4-2-5, which I guess was popularized by Virginia Tech and South Carolina over the last several years. And as you noted in a conversation we had offline, that 5 makes sense considering all the spread offenses in college football and in the ACC. What do we know about the Wolfpack defense circa 2014?
Well, the strengths up front. They bring a lot of experience back. They have almost 100% of their sacks. 3 of the top 4 in tackles for loss. But they're replacing a lot beyond that. The linebackers are all new. They have one senior linebacker, Brandon Pittman, 63 tackles last year. Got a couple of guys in the secondary, but it was a defense that was either middle of the road to not that great last year, and it's to be determined a lot like the offense in terms of how they're going to be this year.
Okay, the Tigers are a whopping 23-point favorite here, which equates to a 72.1% chance of winning. This is another home game for Clemson. Mike Glennon is not back there throwing the bombs he did the last visit to Clemson. I see this as a Clemson rout. I don't know if they'll cover the 23, but a comfortable win at home for the Tigers to move to 3-2 and 2-1 in the ACC.
It'll be interesting to see. They got Louisville ahead of this game. It's weird to think, you got Florida State and Clemson and Georgia and some of those games the last couple of years. Does Louisville become a look-ahead game? Do they say, NC State, no, it's not that much. But, Clemson's been pretty good at keeping the focus game to game. I think they cover that. I have them winning 45-17 right now, but obviously there's a lot of time between now and October. But it'll be, I think they'll win pretty comfortably.
Okay, and the 6th and final game of this episode is the Louisville Cardinals, I guess this is stand for Cardinal, the Louisville Cardinals. This is a team that was 12-1 last year, 7-1 in AAC play. I think this is my most overrated team on the schedule. Now, you may think I'm crazy. I think you think I'm crazy, but because they return 8 on offense, 5 on defense, and both kickers. They led the nation in total defense and ranked 2nd in scoring defense. Now, they played in the AAC number 1, but secondly, one of those 3 starters on offense they lost was Teddy Bridgewater, and, of course, 6 defensive starters. But not only that, they have a new coach, a new head coach, and I believe Charlie Strong took most of his, if not all of his staff with him to Texas. So what you have is not only a team that lost their star player, star quarterback, much like Clemson did, There's a whole new coaching staff there. The Bobby Petrino era has begun. Have no idea what to expect. I just believe that Louisville is in a transition season. What do you know about the Cardinals?
Well, you've got all that turnover. Starting with Teddy Bridgewater, he's been so good. He's been that consistent force for that offense. Now you're moving to a new offensive coordinator. You got some new guys you're looking at skill positions, but Will Gardner takes over, 6'5", redshirt sophomore. He attempted only 12 passes last year, so it's we don't know much about him, but he had 542 passing yards in the spring game, which that's a lot of passing in the spring game. I don't know if they were doing 7-on-7 or if they may have been. I don't know. Some are doing that, but he's got one of the best. He's got an all-ACC first-teamer receiver in Devontae Parker, who has he's at a strong yards per catch average over his career. Had 16.1 last year, so you got to can stress defense. Defensively, they do lose key guys, but it was the defense that was so good last year. Number 3 in the nation in yards per play. Number 2 in scoring defense. Number 1 in third down defense. So they're used to going out there and shutting down offenses. We'll see translating from facing the sort of Central Floridas and the Tulsas and the teams like that to facing Clemson and Florida State and some of the offense they'll face this year. But it's an interesting team because they've been so good under Strong, who took over the mantle from Petrino, and they've won 30 games the last 3 seasons. They've only played 2 top 25 opponents, but beat both of them. They beat West Virginia. They beat Florida. So they're an intriguing team.
Yeah, it should be interesting because it's one thing to play one top 25 opponent a year, 1 or 2 or so, but in the ACC is not the top conference, but there's Clemson, Florida State, Boston College is a tough team to play. Georgia Tech is a different team than you see every week, so the competition's ramped up a little bit. One thing I don't think either of us mentioned is the defensive coordinator, the new defensive coordinator, will be familiar with the Tigers because this is Todd Grantham, who's moving over from Georgia. And this is a team that doesn't play the 4-2-5. They're moving to a 3-4 under Grantham. So early line has Clemson favored at home again by 10, and I think that's probably about right. So I've got the Tigers moving to 4-2 with this win, and what's that make them? 3-1 in the ACC.
Yeah, I have Clemson win this one. I have them the 10. I have it, at 9. So I think Louisville's good enough where they can make a run at Clemson, and their offense is going to be interesting to see. Without Bridgewater. But I think they're going to be able to put up some points this year just because they have some pretty good running backs. So they should have a solid, balanced attack.
Okay, so through 6 games, both of us have the Tigers being 4-2 with losses to Georgia and Florida State on the road and victories over South Carolina State, Florida State, North Carolina State, and Louisville. We'll be back in a day or so with the second half of the season, the second 6 games. So be sure to check back soon. Brandon, thanks for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.